Welcome to It's Alive, where we host a space every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, to talk about developments in the world of UBI and meet with the people who are making it all happen. I'm Scott Santens. I've been researching, writing, and advocating for the concept of UBI for the last 10 years. For those new to the concept, UBI stands for Unconditional or Universal Basic Income. It's the idea that every individual in a society can and should be guaranteed a periodic cash payment without means test or work requirement in order to make their way in the world upon a firm foundation. I recently started the Income to Support All Foundation, or ITSA Foundation, which provides support to projects that aim to make UBI a reality through research, storytelling, and implementation. You can learn more at itsafoundation.org. Today, we've got Ryan Harrison joining us as our special guest, and I'm also joined, as usual, by my co-hosts, Conrad Shaw and Josh Worth. They're co-founders of Comingle, and they're on here as the UBI guy and Comingler 1. Comingle is one of the first projects we're promoting at the ITSA Foundation. Josh, can you tell people what Comingle is all about?
Indeed, yes. Comingle is a money-sharing app that allows people to pool a percentage of their income into a community fund that gets divided up evenly and distributed as a weekly basic income. And the result is that members give money when they have it and get money when they need it, so that no member ever goes a week without income. And you can learn all about it at comingle.us. And we have just resumed doing some deep development, and that's in many ways thanks to the crowd fund that we ran that a lot of you guys supported. So your money is being well spent. Conrad, you got anything else you want to add? Any updates?
Not really. It's been so the crowd fund also had a dual purpose, though. I'll add of stepping out into public, starting to build the community and demonstrating that community support, because we've been sort of flying under the radar for a long time. And it's it gave us enough funding for 4 or 5 months of development runway, but immediately it inspired some additional large contributions from larger donors and funders, which was another big part of the purpose. So right now, the Comingle crowdfund page, you can find it in the links I'm about to add, remains open, and its main focus is bringing as many people in as possible, even for $1, showing how many people are potential future comminglers. So if you haven't joined in or gotten on the wait list, check out the links and the ways to get involved. At your convenience.
Thanks, Conrad. Thanks, Josh. So now is the time where I'd like to cover just a little bit of basic income news before we get into conversation with our guest and get into the topic of the day. And today, that news, I guess I'd just like to cover some of the pilot findings that have been coming in. Like this week has been kind of crazy as far as just how many preliminary findings or even just in general findings from various pilots around the world have been coming in.
Is that just it's the end of the year? Everybody's posting their results. Do you think that's what's going on?
I don't know if that has anything to do with it. I think it's more about that there's just so many pilots out there right now, and there's just going to be times where you get a result coming out and you wait a month or two, and then there's some times where you get 4 or 5 papers and results all at once. And I think this just happens to be one of those times. So I'll start off with first of all talking about the experiment in Kenya, and that's been like an ongoing, very large, very long pioneering experiment in basic income. It's a 12-year experiment involving thousands of people, and the initial findings are from the first 2 years. And it's really interesting because they also, the first 2 years, they wanted to test a couple other things. And so besides having a monthly amount for 12 years, and there's 7 years into it, so there's still 5 years left in that 12-year cohort, there were also two other experimental cohorts. And so one of those cohorts received the same amount of basic income as the 12-year cohort, but for 2 years instead of 12. And another cohort got the same amount as that 2-year cohort, but all at once up front instead of over those 2 years as a monthly basic income. And yeah, the results of that comparison between those three were just announced, and that's brand new stuff. So yeah, here's some of the stuff about that. I did like a summary thread or summary post on Twitter about that. So here's a key quote from it and a couple of things. So the quote is, given how entrepreneurially minded the recipients are, the researchers found no evidence that any of the payments discouraged work or increased purchases of alcohol. In fact, so many people who used to work for wages instead started businesses that there was less competition for wage work and overall wages in villages rose as a result. So kind of a key finding is that there's actually a ton of entrepreneurship happening. And as a result of all that entrepreneurship, wages are actually rising for those who aren't entrepreneurs because there's just so many people deciding to start their own businesses. Very interesting to see that. Now, as the comparison between the three groups, very interestingly, I think, in general, the windfall, the lump sum group, actually saw a lot more entrepreneurs out of that. Like it seemed to be much more useful to get that as one lump sum to start up a business for entrepreneurs. And so there's a lot of better outcomes for that lump sum group. But then also compared to the monthly group was a bit less stressed and more happy. So there's this mental health difference as well. But what was particularly interesting was comparing to the 12-year group, because the 12-year group seemed to kind of get the best of both worlds, where those who wanted to receive the monthly income received the monthly income, but those who actually wanted something more like this, a big lump sum, they formed these voluntary, they're called ROSCAs, which is rotating savings and credit associations.
Or table banking is another thing people call it often.
Yeah, or I believe I've referred to it as like wheel banking or wheel. I don't know. I just think of wheels as part of this too, because what happens is people join this kind of circle, and people put in an amount every month, and then each month one person gets the entire amount of that circle. So you're able to generate these lump sums voluntarily, thanks to people having this monthly income. So it really is providing this kind of best of both worlds thing. And of course, it would make sense to see this, but there's definitely better mental health outcomes too with people in the 12-year group, because they feel like this is, they've got plenty of time. They know that their basic needs are covered for a full 12 years, and even, now 7 years in, they know there's 5 years left. So yeah, you can read that. There's an article about that in Vox and some other places too. Again, that's pretty new. So
this one's super fascinating too. I have a couple questions I want to get back to about that, or thoughts about that after you talk about the other.
Yeah, that one certainly fits into what we're talking about today, anyways, as far as non-governmental basic incomes. Really interesting. Okay, so next, I also want to talk about there's another report. This one is from Ulster County, New York. And this one happened during the pandemic. They provided $500 a month. And here's a quote from the research. In sum, findings from the pilot indicate that despite the extraordinary stressors of the global pandemic and unprecedented nationwide inflation, the treatment group held steady or improved in many of the primary outcomes measured, while these same outcomes declined for the control group. Although the treatment group exhibited minor declines in specific areas, such as psychological distress, on average, they experienced greater improvements in financial health, physical health, housing, and food security compared to a control group. Tangible progress was recorded in physical health, with treatment participants reporting fewer physical limitations and an overall improvement in their physical functioning. The findings also underscored a notable reduction of food insecurity and an uptick in employment stability for members of the treatment group, emphasizing a holistic improvement in their quality of life. Also interesting, recipients were 4 times more likely than the control group to provide financial support to family or friends 1 year into the intervention. And when asked if they could cover an unexpected $400 expense, the treatment group's capability remained steady from baseline to wave 4 at 17.4%, and in contrast, the control group's ability decreased from 13.16% to 7.89%, a 5% point drop. So I think that's really interesting, considering the fact that this, again, took place during the pandemic. So
yeah, it's resilience in the face of
right, like basic income. The basic income group, it's like usually in a normal situation, you could expect the basic income group to, build up savings and be more capable of handling like a $400 expense. But during this pandemic, they maintained their same ability to handle that, whereas those who didn't get this, their ability to do that greatly decreased. So yeah, really interesting. There's more to that one, but I'll just recommend that people look up that one as well as far as Ulster County. And another one, this is a collection of results or a combined kind of result from 4 different pilots across the U.S. And this is looking at the impact of the basic income that parents are receiving on their kids. So let's say, here's a quote: "Guaranteed income helped improve many children's relationships to school, including their behavior, academic performance, and enthusiasm. With guaranteed income, parents also had greater flexibility with their work hours and spent more time at home with their children, including helping them with homework." So yeah, this kind of showed that this just improved educational outcomes. And part of the reason why it improved educational outcomes was that parents were able to spend more time, with their kids. And this is also something that we've seen in prior basic income pilots. This is something that we've seen in the natural experiment from the casino dividends with the Eastern Band of Cherokees in North Carolina. Very long-term natural experiment there showed the same kind of stuff. And also, I just think that, this, again, adds even more support for why we should have continued, the monthly enhanced child tax credit that we saw during 2021 instead of, letting that drop off because of so much positive impact that has on kids. And finally, I guess this may not even be the last one, but this just came out today, actually. And so this is initial findings from the basic income pilot in Ireland that's focused on artists. And because this just came out, I actually don't, I haven't even had time to read through this stuff. But what I did just tweet about this pilot was that, you're of course seeing some good stuff when it comes to artists being more able to focus on their art. Like, of course, that makes sense. Here's a quote from one of the organizers. "Artists and creative arts workers in receipt of the payment are experiencing less anxiety and depression, spending more time working in their chosen fields, and investing more in their arts career. It shows that the scheme has had a positive impact during the first 6 months of payments and has the potential to transform creative practice. A couple like specific findings that are from this from the report. Let's see. Uh, mm, the basic income recipients are 12 percentage points more likely than the control group to be able to sustain themselves through arts work alone. Um, life satisfaction measured on a scale from 1 to 10 increased by more than half a point for the basic income recipients. Um, and basic
I
income
think
recipients were 3.6 percentage points less likely to have felt depressed or anxious all the time compared to the control group. So there's other stuff here too, and you can find it in one of those recent tweets about this. But yeah, it's just really cool to see that artists are actually able to spend more on their careers as artists and actually able to shift more towards earning from their um, creations as artists instead of focusing on their like side gigs and stuff to help fund their art.
And I think people take that, they don't appreciate how important that is as an artist to be able to really commit your time to it. I bet if there was a way to measure it, you'd find that the quality of the art or the artist's appreciation of what they're able to put out is massively improved. Like I remember as an actor in New York City, if I'm working 30 hours a week at the bar and scraping together a few hours here and there to try to get ready for an audition or to do the work for the little play I'm doing, I feel like I'm not really pursuing the art the way that it needs to be pursued. It is a full-time commitment to be a serious artist, and the time is the most valuable resource. And so you end up in these limbos where you feel like you never really get to start. That's a big issue I have with the way the arts world works. Is people who have the ability to not make any other money for a certain amount of time, i.e. people who have money or support, end up being the ones who, by and large, make it in the industry just because it's like having an internship. You have the ability to just take your time and work for the experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so much of art is about just like doing the art and gaining those skills, and how do you actually do that? If you're having to scrape by survival, and how do you pay for the materials to even do the art that you want to do? Like, yeah, all of it. Uh, yeah, let's go now that we've covered those. All that really interesting basic income pilot news. Welcome to our space, Ryan. Thanks for joining us today. Do you just want to just tell listeners just a little bit about your background, what you've been up to, and yeah, let's get into this this conversation of basic income outside of government. You there, Ryan?
Mm-mm.
Uh-oh, we lost Ryan. We bored him.
Yeah.
It looks like he yeah, like lost connection and now he's reconnecting.
Okay.
So I wonder if he even didn't hear. You're just saying, "Hey Ryan, can you hear us?" Ryan, are you there?
We can just talk about him behind his back while we wait for him to get in.
He's a cool guy. I met him
He's
a
a
while ago, and he's always been just a
Uh-oh.
pure-hearted supporter
yeah.
and advocate and thinker. And he's on our advisory board for Comingle, and he provides a very powerful service in that he picks apart all of the little strategic um, uh, aspects of what we're trying to build, which is pretty complicated, both in terms of legal structure, in terms of design, and he has a lot of experience that it's good to have someone on the board who's not just there to kind of well, all our board is good, but he's the one who kind of keeps us to task the most and puts us through our paces. So.
Yes, we're lucky to have him. Are you there, Ryan? Can you hear us? Are you talking?
He looks like a listener right now.
Are you showing up as a speaker for me?
Oh, there. Okay. Now I think he's back. Or now did we lose him again? It's weird. We keep inviting him to speak, and then he keeps getting knocked back down.
I wonder if he needs to do it on his phone rather than on his desktop.
It shouldn't make a difference. Whatever you were doing before when you chimed in and said, "Hello, guys," that's what we should. That's what we need to have going.
I guess while we wait, I could talk about one other thing.
There's a lot of more pilots to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to. There's some fruitful stuff in that Kenya stuff that no one really talks about very much, or it's a very different angle on it, and to me, it's a very sort of implicated sister idea to the idea of basic income, the lump sum idea, and then it's unfortunate to me when it gets posed as one or the other, like which is better, because to me, the idea of basic income is the knowledge of ongoing security, like someone any day you see them is gonna be fine because they have money, but also the ability to invest in oneself and like take a little bit larger risks or start businesses is also important. And so I was reading with a friend. I was reading Thomas Piketty's huge new book, and it's funny how he approaches it is kind of how I think of it, but not many people talk about it. Where I think it's obvious that you would want both, like some sort of he sort of takes UBI for granted. Like obviously we should do that, and he's moved on, which is it'd be great if we were there. And his other proposal is a baby bond. That's a similar sort of a thing. At the age of 25.
Sure, yeah.
You get, I mean, he is a very like $100,000 a person, but an amount to get you started, whether he goes towards school or starting a business, and then have an ongoing floor of income security covers all of the aspects of opening up and someone's opportunity and unleashing their potential. So for me, it's like UBI and universal healthcare are the common ones that are put together. But I've always thought a baby bond of some size should be thrown in there too. So, people can, come out of school or whatever, 25 years old, have an idea and be able to pursue it, whether it's, starting a family or more education or starting a business or whatever.
Yeah. I guess I'll just add a bit onto that too, which is that a couple of things. So first, I don't like how, like, when it comes to the details of these baby bond proposals, that when you look at them, like we were just talking about it, if you actually get this amount at age 18, 21, whatever, and it's something that would start your life, then that's great. And what's weird is that some of these proposals, if you look at the small print, they'll be like, oh, the money isn't actually yours. There's like a bureaucracy that has it, and you can ask for permission, to like use the money for only specific things like buying a house or going to college, and not really much else until like you turn like 65 or something, and then you can use it for anything you want to. So it's really weird to see those kind of details in these baby bond policy proposals. Yeah, we can hear you now, Ryan.
So
Hey, you're
sorry
back.
about that. But
yeah, as long as it's working
yeah,
out, great. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you for the kind words. I'm Ryan. As Conrad et al. Mentioned, I've been an advisor to Comingle for the past, I don't even know. I think it was about 4 years.
I think you were the first
4 years,
one.
5 years, something like that.
We were immediately like, well, Ryan's got to be on board. Well, and Scott too. Scott's on every advisory board there is, and we're like, got to have him. But Ryan has a special background, I'm sure we'll talk about, of basically trying to do like a smaller, even more private version of what Comingle is setting out to do. And so
you want to
Yeah,
talk about that, Ryan?
the brief history is that I'm not even sure when I got into UBI, but in 2017 I started trying to do something about it. So I was like, all right, so people are talking about UBI or basic income. The government's not doing anything. The movements and initiatives to get government doing something, nothing against them, love them. But why couldn't you do this on a voluntary basis? Why couldn't you do this as a part of a member-based organization? So then I just I brained it out. So I wrote a complete proposal, which I called the Voluntary Basic Income Proposal, which said or wrote out in excruciating detail how one would actually run a member-based voluntary basic income program. I then I circulated it amongst sort of friends and family, and plugged all the holes. So every time somebody asked me a question, I basically wrote up an FAQ item about it. So it was kind of a rock solid proposal of how you would do this on a theoretical basis. In 2017, I also went to the Basic Income Conference, and sort of talked to people about the proposal there, and there were no problems with the structure of this proposal in terms of just having a group of people agree to. My number was 10%, but basically you just share 10% of their income. You could do it with Excel spreadsheets. You just sort of needed 10 people that were willing to do it. I then started trying to recruit. So I tried to recruit people at the Basic Income Conference. I tried to recruit people through various basic income events. I presented in 2018 at something called the Democratizing Democracy Conference on Voluntary Basic Income, also trying to recruit folks. And in about 2019, I just gave up. This is not really my skill set. I'm an organizer of process and technology. I'm not really an organizer of people. So I could get the theory down, and I could see very clearly how this could work. But in terms of organizing the community, it's not my skill set, and I failed.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, you put out some really well thought out work that, like, it's informed what we're doing for sure. So yeah, don't sell it short. But I think Conrad was like, as soon as I talked to him about Comingle, he was like, "Oh, you got to talk to Ryan Harrison.
I feel this is more of an evolution than a failure,
Yeah, it was a first step there. And so let me just so you were picturing kind of just manually working out, like just finding 10 or so, whatever size group of people, and just being like, okay, you put in your numbers and we'll figure it out.
Exactly. And this comes from being I'm a technologist. I was thinking that people might actually use technology as a barrier, and they might say there's always the but what about problem. So you say you want to do something, a group of people want to do something, it's clearly in the group's interest, and there's always a dependency or a but what about, or an if only we had $1 billion, we could solve this problem. If only 5 other people would join us, we could do X. And I thought that the technology might become one of these if onlys. If only we had this really nice technology platform, which Comingle has become, then people would do this. So by trying to just do it on a member basis with Excel spreadsheets, I thought I was actually bypassing an if only, to actually get people that stated interest in basic income to take action about basic income.
I'm curious, Ryan, since it was kind of spreadsheet based, are you familiar with groupincome.org and what they've built over the years? That's basically along these lines, but it has a solid graphical user interface. It's meant to help connect groups together. So if you do find a group of 10 people, then instead of taking the spreadsheet route, then it said, hey, you can join this platform, and then that group decides whatever the percentage is that they pay in and stuff, and then decides which method of paying each other that they do. So, and then it's all up to people to do this themselves. So it is along that spreadsheet. It's not like Comingle where kind of set it and forget it with your, setting up your bank account, and it's all automated. But instead, it's there's just different groups of different sizes deciding their different rules to like help out those people in members of groups in a similar way. Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with the people behind it. So I met the OK Turtles, sort of, I guess,
Yeah, Greg.
crypto bros, in 2017, 2018. But I don't think this group income thing existed in 2017. The people did. The OK Turtles people did, and they were like big on crypto at that time.
Yeah, I would say that it was actually the group income project was the result of the very first what do we call that? The it was in San Francisco, the Create-a-thon. That's right. It's the first basic income Create-a-thon, and I think that was in like 2016, 2015, 2016 maybe. I don't remember how early that was, but the idea came out of that, and then it was like this real slow going process, and up to where it is now. But I would also say too that the Greg, the creator, is very interested in crypto, but also like the platform Group Income is not a crypto only platform. But it does, like, let's say if group members can pay another group member through Bitcoin or whatever if they want to, but again, it's all outside of the platform. They could choose whatever they want to. But that also brings up the discussion too, since we are talking about non-governmental basic income, that there's a lot of people out there that believe that the way to do that is through crypto. So that's something to discuss as well.
I have such feelings about it. So many, especially when you're fundraising or trying to fundraise and like getting your toe in the door of like these wealthy communities and summits and things like that. And the first thing a lot of them will say to you is, "Oh, you have to do this with crypto." And reading between the lines, it's like, okay, one, someone's going to be at the lead of this gold rush, which is what most of the cryptos are. Two, they're willing to wait on UBI and bundle it together, like the almost impossible task of making a UBI happen with the almost impossible task of making a specific crypto coin happen, which speaks to just such privilege, where it's like, yeah, in 10 or 20 years, inevitably we'll start helping people. Whereas like, to me, it's my answer is always like, cash is king. There's millions of people right now that could use some money to buy a sandwich or do their laundry or pay their electric bill. And you're just okay waiting for like the future to sort of maybe happen to them someday, as long as some specific coin takes off to the, so I always say to them, like, we're building it with cash, and if there's ever a coin that's established and as strong or usable widely, then we have the infrastructure to just switch it in as a different currency. But until then, it's one of my pet hobbies is to call out people who are like, this has to happen with cryptocurrency.
So moving away from crypto,
which we're always trying to do.
The thing that attracted me about Comingle is that it kind of changed my hypothesis. So when I first started this, I had a hypothesis that the reason people weren't doing this was because there wasn't some well thought out theory for how to do it, or some well thought out process for how to do it. And my initial foray kind of, disproved is a little strong of a word, but let's use it colloquially, disprove that hypothesis. And a few years later, I was crashing on Conrad and Dea's couch while attending a Yang event in New York. Thank you very much, Conrad. And he was talking about, I don't think it was called Comingle at that point. I think this was still a kernel of an idea. And one of my hypotheses was that the technology would actually be a barrier. It would become but what about? But here, listening to Conrad and seeing the growth of Comingle over the past few years, the technology is actually kind of an enabler. It makes it easy. So if you're talking about, I have to find a group and then sign up to a group and then, work out these spreadsheets and have lots and lots of trust in the group to not just steal my money. If you can embed that in an app, which makes it really easy, and you can target people that already say they're interested in basic income. And you're like, look, this is super easy. You just sign up, one click right here, the same process that you use to sign up for a Mint or Personal Capital or any of these other finance apps, and it'll automatically take care of all these transactions for you. By lowering the barrier, you can actually kind of get people over that hump from, I believe in this, but like, make it easy. I only have so many minutes in the day. And I really appreciate that. The fact that Comingle is doing something instead of just merely talking about basic income, and that B, it's a real test.
For me, it's also just the potential. Like, there's one thing about testing out an idea, right? I mean, it seems to a lot of people the idea and theory of basic income has been obvious and established for a long time, but it really is a question of organizing people and building something that has a potential to scale. And my focus for the very first many years was, it seems like it has to be a federal government thing, or it has to be done at that sort of scale to really have the impact worth, making this a cause of mine. And it was when Josh reached out to me about this Comingle idea. It just sort of broke that little belief in my brain, or that dogma, and made me realize we really do have the ability with today's technology to build something that can scale to a really meaningful size. And I think if people are going to be part of something, if they're going to sign up for something, they want to know that it can go beyond like a personal, 10, 20, 100 people group, and have the potential to be something much bigger. And so our thesis is sort of like, and if you build it, and like you said, make it easy, and it has, the possibility and infrastructure to grow, then it can happen. You just have to sow the soil before people will really take their precious time and attention and trust and put it in it.
Yeah, I completely agree. The other thing I'll note is, this is I guess not a background that everybody can relate to, but I'm trained as technically a theoretical physicist. And one of the things that science, and I think physics in particular, teaches is a humility. It teaches you about the limits of theory and about the limits of what is knowable, about the limits of what is testable. And it kind of gives you this sense that at a certain point, you just have to do the thing. Theory is great, and theory and experiment build on each other. But theory will only get you so far. At a certain point, you just need to do the thing and see what happens. And that's exactly what I think Comingle is about, and that's exactly what I think they're doing. And it's not a theoretical exercise. This is it's a build it, make it easy, and see what happens.
And back in 2017 at the Basic Income Conference, and we started, and that was probably the first one that Day and I went to also. It was in that space. It had been sort of, the idea of basic income had been kept alive for, many, many years in this sort of academic researcher space, and people would come together and discuss the theory and their latest, publications and papers and essays. And it lacked the acknowledgement that real change and really doing something involves people, and it's messy, and it's, there's the political way to do it, but there's also the just the organizing and enabling way to do it. But it involves a lot more than crafting a strong theory. It means actually building something, whether it's movements and groups, or the technological infrastructure. Something has to be built before anything's going to happen.
Absolutely. And I guess to close this thread, it's been in the news recently that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor just passed away. I went back and read her final letter when she sort of disclosed her illness and sort of left public life. And one of the closing points in that letter, now, she was not talking about basic income here. She was talking about civics education. But sort of a direct quote from her is, "It's not enough to understand. You've got to do something." Now, she was talking about civics education, but I think that this extends to pretty much any civic endeavor. And basic income or universal basic income is a civic endeavor. It's not enough to understand. You've got to do something. And Comingle is doing something, and that is what attracted me to them, and that's why I continue to do what I can for Comingle today.
Yeah, when it comes to actually doing something and this kind of like focus on the reality of what works, it's just interesting to me how that we all seem to share this this background of like science and engineering. Like my background, physics and psychology. That's why I'm really interested in like kind of the neuroscientific side of basic income. Conrad's background, engineering, your background, theoretical physics. Like, you know, it there's on the one hand, you know, basic income is evidence based. There's so many experiments out there. There's pilots. There's so much that we know already. That's what drew me into the space really in the first place, is just seeing that there was already experiments showing really interesting findings, you know, a decade ago when I got into this. And of course, those had already existed. You know, there were pilots happening in the 70s and stuff. But like, it's on the one hand, there's valuing of empirical data and, you know, what actually happens in real life when someone gets something, instead of like those philosophical arguments, political arguments and stuff. And yeah, and on the other hand is, just because there's all this evidence, you still don't know. Like you can have all these kind of little experiments about a plane, and you know, have all these testings and the vacuum chambers and stuff to test aerodynamics and whatnot. But like, you still got to actually build it, put it together, and put it in the air. And if it flies, it flies. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And then you learn how to improve this stuff. So yeah, I think it's just interesting that we all kind of really care about empirical evidence, and also like just doing stuff to show that it really works.
Yeah, that's where I got into it too. I think it's basically, we're seeing like you're thinking about like what are the big problems that we're trying to solve as people, and like that's what science usually is about. It's like figuring out solutions to problems like this. The most glaring problem on Earth is poverty, probably, or income inequality, and then it's like there's actually a solution to it. Like we have a pretty solid, like at least in theory, way of fixing that problem. And to have that just be sitting there in front of us without any action being taken is, I think, to people that like to think critically, is very frustrating. And so it does kind of like ignite some kind of call to action. So,
Yeah, and I'm already feeling this frustration too. Is like it's interesting that we just started this conversation, you know, with starting off with the news of you know, 4 different papers coming out, you know, all in the same week, and it's like I already see that. Like I've already felt that I'm frustrated that we're just seeing pilot after pilot, results after results, and there's still nothing happening.
I mean, the pilots themselves are something like, so
Right, but it's interesting
not to
that other
discount
people,
that, but it's not like
like,
right.
yeah, like people outside the space, or let's say you only heard about basic income, let's say this year, and suddenly there's like, you're seeing pilot after pilot results, and you're like, why are we still doing this? Like, why are we still piloting this? So it's interesting that there's people who are new to this, and they're already also getting frustrated with just how many pilots and how many pilots do we need to do before we actually do it.
And a movement and building something like this requires a really well-rounded sort of approach from a lot of different angles. And I think I credit a lot to my wife, Dea, to bring me in close contact with like activist circles through her work and her film stuff in the environmental space, and just seeing just the intense amount of organizing that goes on to making anything significant happen in such a sort of like a broken political space and all of that, and kind of breaking me out of my box of like not appreciating that it's not enough to understand something, you have to build something, you know, and pushing more in that direction with all these pilots, with a lot of people in the that stick to the stem and don't appreciate, like, also we have to organize people. It reminds me of a Cards Against Humanity. Have you ever played that game where there's that one
Yeah.
prompt where it's like step 1 blank, step 2 blank, step 3 profit? And I feel like we've been in this place where it's
South
step
Park reference.
1 pilots, step 2 question mark, step 3 UBI. It's like there's no connecting of the dots between how do we get from the research and idea and understanding phase to the implementation phase. And for us, for Day and I, starting with the docuseries and then moving into Comingle, it was always about how can we translate whatever we're learning, whatever we're doing into actually building something, actually building a community, actually building something that's working and helping people. And like with the pilots, we had a really annoying discussion with one of our pitching partners at one point when we spent a whole year trying to sell the docuseries to networks. And that's a long story about how networks are very disappointing and they only fund celebrity content. But our pitching partner, we split ways with them and went a different direction. But they said, sort of trying to console us and saying, well, at least as if like we weren't going to go on and still continue the project, like at least you helped those 20 people and really changed their lives. And that was like the worst thing they could have said to me. It's like, yeah, I know the 20 people who are now close friends were helped through this time, but that was not the reason we spent 7 years and millions of dollars running this project. It was about the greater change for society. And so, like all of these pilots, when I see the results for the people in Ulster, the people in wherever, where basically, 10,000 people applied for something and 100 people got in and they got helped for 2 years and then they stopped getting help. It's like, it's not about that. It's not about the benefit that was given to a very small number of people. That's like an even more targeted form of welfare as we know it. It's about how can we take what we've learned and what we've done and actually do something at scale with it. And if you don't have an answer to that question, which the pilots generally don't, and a lot of the movement generally doesn't right now, then you really have to ask yourself, why are you doing what you're doing?
I want to push on something that Josh said around poverty, because there's a sort of a why do we do, and you can always just keep asking why. So why do I do it proximally? Why do I do it in Comingle proximally? Is about doing something about the need for action and about how there's a limit to theory. But if you go a few whys past that, there's this very visceral, very emotional feeling of I think that our collective great-grandchildren will judge us very, very harshly. It is unconscionable that you can have a world so wealthy, the wealthiest it's ever been actually, and yet have abject poverty for, depending on how you count, anywhere between 500 million and 1 billion people. And there's this thread throughout the world, and I'll concentrate on the U.S. example since I'm more familiar with that, around poor people. It starts in the 1960s with the Martin Luther King's Poor People's Campaign. It's been continued today with the modern Poor People's Campaign, about sort of almost trying to hold a mirror up to society and say, how can you allow this? Like, I mean, this is crazy. So much wealth and yet so much poverty. And I think that we as Americans will hold up sort of these secular ideals around sort of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I don't really believe you can achieve any of those things substantively if you're in crushing poverty. And it kind of makes a mockery out of those ideals. It kind of makes a mockery out of every individual having a moral worth if folks are living in poverty. And it's a failure in our society. You can treat that as our society as Americans, or our society as a human species, that we would so renege on our obligations to our fellow men to allow poverty in the world.
That historical perspective.
Yeah,
that historical perspective is really, I think about that a lot too. Like all of the great successes that we have, or that people that are successful now, any great technologist or person that's doing something that is amazing that you're looking at, you know that at some point, a future generation will look back at that person and be like, yeah, that's great that they did all that, but they did all that while there was millions of people suffering needlessly because of the lack of resources being distributed properly. And I think that's it's like you look at Thomas Jefferson, like great thinker, great man, amazing person, but it's like, but he also just was turned a blind eye to slavery, right? And did not care about that. So it's like, I feel like that's kind of what's going to be, an asterisk on any accomplishment by anybody today. And and climate change, we've got that too. Good.
It's just our collective cognitive dissonance, and I think part of it is we accept what is seen as inevitable or whatever, just because there's no real. It's just too daunting of an idea to approach. Like, how do you approach world like, we leave that to the people in pageants saying, I want world peace. It's like it doesn't really register as something that's actually feasible. Like, how do we fix the climate? I don't know. How do we? But if you build an infrastructure that allows for it to actually change, and one way to do that is through policy, then it becomes approachable. But until someone can see that, until people can see that at large, we just push it to the back of our mind, and we live through this sort of hypocritical mass insanity of saying we believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the equal opportunity for every individual, in the face of the stark reality that we've allowed to persist.
Yeah. There was who was there's one of the mayors for guaranteed income that came out. He had a really good quote. He's like, we've been trying to, the war on poverty has been going on for 60 years, and we've just now getting around to giving money to poor people.
Yeah.
Do you know who said that, Scott? I like that one a lot.
I don't remember his name, but I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
He's one of the I think he's one of the founders of counties for guaranteed income.
Oh, okay.
I think. But yeah, that's a good quote. It was it's basic too, I think, the documentary.
Yeah, but you've got climate change it's a little bit more out of our hands in a way, but like there's such a kind of clear way to help people that are poor and to eliminate poverty. It's now like very clearly laid out. We've got the evidence, and so I think that's what's also interesting to me is that it's a change in mindset that has to happen across for everybody, and that's the part that I think design can help with.
So closing the thread on theory, I think one of the things that is so, I guess, beautiful and attractive about basic income is twofold. One is this beauty of a flower sense, like the sort of knowing more about the history and the theory. It only adds to the beauty of the elegance of the solution that is universal basic income. And the second thread is like the very long historical context. You've had people across time and across political divides endorse sort of things that are basic income or basic income like. If you take it way back, the people of the book, sort of religion, would assert that moral worth comes from the creator, and there's a direct tie between sort of a theoretical moral worth and a substantive moral worth, as in not being in abject poverty. You can take that through the Enlightenment era with folks like Dawn, with the whole sort of a no man is an island. One cannot have rights without reciprocal responsibilities. And one way you can express that responsibility is via a UBI. You can take that on through classical liberalism with Locke and Hobbes, the actualization of rights, sort of mixing one's labor with the natural endowment sort of thinking. From that, you get on to secular humanism, sort of the shared origin of mankind and how we can't decouple our futures from one another. And so on and so forth until eventually you get to the sort of economic efficiency arguments from like a Milton Friedman, sort of if you're going to have a state and if you're going to say one of the things a state should do is prevent its citizens from dying, that an efficient way that you can do it is with a UBI. So I just think it's a very beautiful thing that you can come at this this thing, universal basic income, from so many different perspectives and for such a long period of time, and they all kind of, all the weak signals point in the same direction, which is that this is something that is sort of just the right thing to do from both religious and secular standpoints, that it's efficient, that it's actually in the rational self-interest of the state and the bosses, and so forth and so over.
Yeah, there's so many ways. The thing that really sparked my attention when I first read an article about UBI was, I posted about it on Facebook to like ask my friends about it, because it kind of, assaulted all my assumptions about what's possible in the economy and the social structure. And along came my friend who always disagreed exactly with everything I ever said or thought, and like very different political ideas. And I was gearing up for the argument. And like after 2 comments, he's like, yeah, I could see giving cash to families. And it's just like, that was his in, and with UBI more than any other thing, like I don't really believe you ever should try to convince anyone of anything in a moment. You just seed an idea and let them feel respected and understand where they're at, and just try to like approach it with them. If you leave someone with feeling respected and seeding the idea of UBI within their own context, a lot of times, even if they were very against it initially, they'll come back to you in 3 months and they'll explain to you, like, yes, we need UBI, but this is the reason, and it's their own reason, and it's also correct. So I mean, there's this comment in the comments by Robert Douglas, who says, I can see how voluntary basic income programs can reorganize smaller communities around the income sharing group, but isn't there a danger of that being seen as a form of socialism or communism? And my answer to that is not really. I don't care. It's the fact that it is a voluntary group practicing what it practices, that if someone isn't sold on it, doesn't want to join it, it's not being pushed upon them. It's completely it's like none of your business, like what a bunch of people decide to do with their money between each other. Who cares? And that's sort of the elegance of this, is the end run around the politics of a non-voluntary system, that you have to convince, I guess in these oligarchic days, you have to convince 80% of the population to support something before it even has a chance of passing. It's just we can build something with as big of a community as it justifies, kind of build our own little commingle nation within a nation. And who cares what someone outside of the community thinks? It'll be what it'll be. We'll learn from it. We'll see how it grows. We'll do our best to optimize it, and leave it a big tent idea where people can come in and try it out with us. So yeah, we get to completely avoid the endless argument of like, that's socialism, that's communism, that's extending capitalism, that's whatever. There's all the different versions that have their own problems with it. We can focus instead on everyone's route in, rather than their like how everyone can connect to it, whether they're libertarian or conservative or progressive or whatever, rather than everyone's anti feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. Like the way you said, is there a danger of it being seen as a form of socialism or communism? And it's like, well, it's maybe the initial gut reaction for some people is like, oh yeah, that's bad because it's somehow, it feels a little bit, communisty, right? Like there's this slight tinge of socialism, and I've been programmed to think that those things are horrible, so I'm going to reject it. So yeah, it's kind of a danger, but it's not dangerous to us. It's a danger it's a stopping point for people to kind of explore the idea further.
Well,
it's an excuse to not go deeper, is what it is.
We're in the second hour, and so for everyone who is new listener, what we like to do the first hour is just converse with our guests, and the second hour we bring in people who would like to ask questions and comment and stuff. So we have one request to speak already. We welcome others to request to speak as well if you have a question or comment about what we're talking about. and just emphasize too that let's stick to the discussion that we're having instead of really going outside of it and going off to something else. So please respect that. Ryan, thank you for joining us as a listener today. And what do you have a question or comment along what we've been discussing today?
Yeah, I was wondering what you guys may think of the role of government in a non-governmental basic income, whether that's funding grants or seed money or something like sponsoring hackathons to do the development side of the applications that are needed.
I have several thoughts just from experience on this. Is that early on, we're unlikely to get any grants for something that is this different. And early on, when we're establishing both Comingle structure and ITSA Foundation structure, we're dealing with like trying to fit something radically new and not built for profit, not built to be like a nonprofit and have the limitations of the philanthropic space. That we have to doubly justify ourselves to not be harassed by the government, essentially, to be allowed to do the higher impact work that we're hoping to do. And at the same time, once we establish this model, the idea is to offer it as a tool for either private initiatives and philanthropic initiatives to do more impactful work as they spend down their endowments, as well as government funding. Like we would talk to, if some local government or mayors for a guaranteed income or something wanted to run another pilot, we're hoping to present Comingle as a turnkey option for taking that money and distributing it to more people for a longer amount of time, more effectively. And we're sort of don't really care where the money comes from as long as it's being directed through the channel that we establish as an effective channel. So we aim to present Comingle as a tool both to the general membership and public, but also for as an opportunity for philanthropic and government dollars to run through it as well. It's just we're going to have to establish it before the IRS and the government entities are willing to seed it, I think.
So I share Conrad's view, but I'll separate this into generous versus ungenerous interpretations. So my generous interpretation is the role of government is just to stay out of the way. This is a member-based voluntary thing that doesn't require anything of government other than just to keep out of our way. And if this community wants to, self-organize around income sharing, then just let them do their thing. My ungenerous interpretation is shit or get off the pot. So there have been folks in government talking about various types of basic income for, order 100 years. I mean, we're actually. I mean, and if you look at like, this is not. Is it this? So there's nuance in the differences between universal basic income and negative income taxes. But we were so close. I think it was 72, 73 under Nixon on the
70, 71. Yeah.
Sorry, got the early 70s on
very
Nixon,
close
for the negative income tax.
Yeah,
that was 50 years ago. So my ungenerous interpretation is should or get off the pot. I would love a governmental basic income, but y'all, as in government, ain't doing it. So we as a community will, and we'll do it on a voluntary basis with the constraints and benefits that entails.
Yeah, it's Scott probably knows more of the details, but I use as an example the Townsend groups was instrumental in I think the 30s, maybe after the Great Depression or during the Great Depression, of establishing these groups all over the country of people pushing for something like a social security, like a safety net for senior citizens. And it grew enough in popularity as sort of a grassroots thing that eventually the government couldn't ignore it and felt pressure both just internally by comparison by the public to do their own version. So, what we're doing is like Townsend groups on steroids, connected by the internet. And in all of our documentation for ITSA and Comingle, and just in our practice, we're not really designing ourselves to be advocacy. It's an experimental thing that is hoping to grow and implement just as big as it can in a private model. But in my own brain, if like on the path to a federal version of this, I can see something like, if 1 million people join Comingle and it's working, all of a sudden that it makes it a lot easier to inspire action at a governmental level. So yeah.
Well, I would say
this is
at
all
that point,
hypothetical, but a
Yeah,
million
go for
person
it.
commingle is sort of it's a double-edged sword. Because one of the things that we forget is how hard fought the things are that are good for people that we take for granted. Social Security was not a fait accompli. It was very hard fought. The 40-hour work week, very hard fought. Things that are, I guess, good for people or good for workers, or they tend to be very hard fought things. So from government, given the history of things that are good for workers being hard fought, I'm afraid of sort of political wins, sort of a kill it in a cradle philosophy. And I'm afraid of things like being buried in red tape. But those aren't reasons not to do Comingle. Those are actually reasons to do Comingle. And
right.
Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's where I kind of, I'd probably take it beyond that. Like, because I'm always being asked, like, well, what if the government what if we suddenly have a UBI that's run by the government, and it's always, I'm like, that'd be great, and I just wasted several years of my life on a project. But then I also think, like, actually, what we're doing is actually better than a government solution. At least that's going to be my take. Is that as far as a way to very quickly calculate what people owe, we do that using income tax right now. And that's a pretty shoddy method for calculating, what's fair. There are so many loopholes, so many workarounds. And then there's loopholes and workarounds in the way Comingle's planning to do it as well. But I mean, right now there's a case in the Supreme Court deciding trying to decide how to classify a particular type of income. I don't know if you've been following that, but it's basically we're leaving it up to the Supreme Court to decide whether money that's earned through I forget, it's like an investment in an offshore account or something that never realized actual returns should be taxed as if it was. And so this has all these ramifications of how we tax people's money in the country. And so, but we're doing the same thing. We're basically trying to look at transactions occurring in bank accounts on a very micro level and see, should these things be qualified as income or not? But right now, that's up to the Supreme Court for this particular thing. But for us, it's like we're kind of leaving that in the hands of the users themselves. So we're kind of democratizing that decision. So we're taking information that people are using to classify their own income as whether it should be taxed or not, really. And using those decisions and applying them and trying to create rules from those decisions that people are making. And it's on a very sort of small scale, like, should your gift from your grandma be income or not? Some people might say yes, some people might say no, but like on average, we can use that as a way to determine, it's basically a vote that we're taking. So, I think that a solution that's got some, like a government solution that has some technologically enabled insights is something that we could use regardless of who's running it, right? Whether it's a federally run program or whether it's a privately run program. Anyway, that's it for me. Sorry.
I mean, I also like to point out that what we're building here essentially is a governmental solution.
Right.
It's its own government with a nation of comminglers, essentially. And one of the really exciting things as we, get closer and closer to launch, and we get to imagine, like, how do we actually run this thing for the long term? How do we allow it to grow? How do we stay on mission and not become, some other internet company that loses its soul to profit seeking? And as we think about, like, what kind of abilities do we have as the community grows? If we do hit that 1 million or 100,000 or how a certain amount of revenue that we have to come in to then add in other sort of similarly informed features for the members. Once you have all of these people together, what other community connectivity can we do? What other roles of government can we include? Like we talk about wanting it to eventually function more like a cooperative where there aren't any shareholders. There's just the membership ownership, and introducing, rather than trying to get different sorts of voting mechanisms to happen through political avenues, doing it within this self-selected nation that's has a bunch of people who are already on board, and then setting up a system that would be incredibly hard to get in place in the political or public sphere, and testing that out too. How do we allow people to take the whatever extra money is generated through the community and invest it in such a way where they're actually voting on it far more democratically than something that exists in our democracy. We can play around with all kinds of technological stuff. Like the more people we have, as part of the community, the more people power we have, the more organizing power we have to operate like we're building a new government, right? Just kind of build the model from the ground up. And the thing that's really beautiful about, like you were talking about political wins, Ryan, and the thing to me is that has always been disturbing is the temporary nature of political wins, and what makes activism and advocacy so hard is, the world is always coming to redistract. There's another World War III threat, or whatever is happening next week, and whatever was really important last week kind of fizzles out. And UBI had a big burst in interest when Andrew Yang ran, and it was a big event. It was a campaign, and a lot of people were involved, but it was tied to a temporary timeline. It was tied to an individual personality. And so when that ended, it ended, and people didn't know really where to go. The idea of creating an infrastructure that is sort of, one, easy, set it and forget it, but two, scalable, like, people, it becomes a home for the movement, the experimentation, the general push for basic income to live comfortably and not have like a deadline or a fade out mechanism, just to continue to grow and be resilient as a movement.
So just a quick follow-up on some of the stuff you guys have touched on.
Yeah.
Are you guys targeting areas with weaker and smaller governments and with less of a social safety net? Something like Canada and the US may not be as available. Are you guys targeting regions with the weak governments, small?
That's part of a longer term vision. Part of starting in the United States, Comingle.us kind of implies Comingle.other places, is there's a banking infrastructure here that is a lot more established and set up, and most banks connect to Plaid, and most people can get a bank account, and even that has some barriers to get over to help more people get banked and participate. And when we establish the model here, so the way we think of it is the bigger we grow, the more revenue we have to do more hands-on sorts of things. The idea is to save as much money as possible and make it automated so that it can grow and maximize impact quickly and easily. And in the U.S. is ripe for that. Like you said, it's already kind of set up, and so is Canada. And the way I see it is, if we grow to a couple 100,000 people in the U.S., we have enough revenue to pop up in other places with established banking infrastructures that could further compound that and say, Comingle.Canada.Germany.UK, whatever, and make the smaller adjustments that would need to be made to work with a new currency, with a new legal infrastructure. And as this thing grows, because we're setting it up to be mandated to take additional revenue over overhead costs and put it towards mission-aligned things, we eventually end up with enough money out of the slice that Comingle takes from these wealthier nations to be able to do the heavier boots on the ground, high touch stuff in places that have a bigger administrative burden. So if you want to, say, do a full UBI or like a Comingle program, in Kenya, for example. That would, what we've actually talked to Give Directly about this. We could partner with them. It's a very intensive boots on the ground thing to get people first to trust that it's happening, to, partner with the local government for, setting things up. They don't have a banking infrastructure, so we'd have to, at that point, start talking about, how do we deliver it to people using cryptocurrencies tied to the US dollar through cell phones or things like that, because they can't just kind of walk into Bank of America, And then at that point, when we have the infrastructure, also they don't have necessarily a high enough average income in those countries to fund their own UBI based on the prosperity, because they're not like us, one of the wealthiest countries in history, where it's just a question of redistribution. It's also a question of capital. So if we have a lot of money flowing that we can play with to both set up that infrastructure, we also will have money to endow and say, here's how we want to set it up, Comingle.Kenya. We also are taking this much money to then subsidize everyone's payout to a degree that it represents a significant basic income that does not, hurt the people of lower incomes. It helps the people who need to be helped.
This is Ryan. I shy away.
Ryan,
yeah, sorry, the other Ryan. I shy away from using words like government when I'm talking about Comingle. And I also shy away from speculating too much about the future when talking about Comingle. When you start using words like government, they're very loaded. You could be talking about government as a state, which Comingle is absolutely not. Or you could be talking about government or governance as an organized community, which it is. So it can it confuses things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do view Comingle as a form of prefigurative politics. Prefigurative politics is a fancy way of saying three different things. One is a tactic, and the colloquial way of talking about that tactic of prefigurative politics comes from the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. It's building a new world from the shell of an old. You cannot invent a wholly new world and expect it to work from a tactical perspective. So you make small steps now within the old world to build towards the new, build within the shell of the old. So you take advantage of things like the fact that we all have bank accounts and that we all have personal property and personal income that we can choose to share or not to build this new thing within the shell of the old. You're not fighting the institutions of the old, you're actually building upon them. There's also a promise that goes into this view of prefigurative politics. And this is a play on King. The moral arc of the universe bends. How do you complete that sentence? I believe that the moral arc of the universe bends the way that people make it bend, or that men make it bend. So by doing something like Comingle, you're in your own small way, you're bending the moral arc of the universe towards something that I believe is the right thing to do. And there's also a warning that comes with prefigurative politics. This one is a little sciencey and a little nerdy, but one of my favorite quotes from a scientist comes from Sagan. It's in all of our purity and all of our vastness, there's no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. And this ties back, obviously to the whole, I think our great-grandchildren will judge us very harshly. Anyways, TLDR, I shy away from government when talking about Comingle. I don't speculate too much about the future of Comingle. But I do view it as a form of prefigurative politics along tactical lines, promise lines, and sort of a very existential warning line.
Yeah, that's a good term to have in the pocket. I've not heard that much.
I like I looked it up. You made me Google it, and it says prefigurative politics are the modes of organization and social relationships that strive to reflect the future society being sought by the group. It's just very proactive mechanism, and that's a really good term for it.
All great answers. I'll let
you got any more, Ryan? So you were on last week, waiting to talk about Canada. Is that right? Ryan St. John, is that right?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask something because there was a senator that really cares about UBI was on the call, and I was hoping she'd hear it, but some other time.
Kim paid, yeah. It was interesting to see Kim paid there with us last time. At least maybe just been her staff member. I don't know, but yeah, that was cool.
Her name was in the roster there. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Ryan. Michael, you are up next. It's good to see you, by the way. Thanks for joining us today.
Of course, good to be here. I'm not usually here, but when I am, it's always a really good and fascinating discussion. I suppose I don't really have a question lined up. I was just I'm wondering, like, are there any other? Okay, so one of the things that I find to be interesting about Comingle and a lot of the other basic income programs projects is that uh, basically what are your plans? What are you thinking might happen after a universal basic income might actually get done? Say it gets done, what next? What does Comingle become? What does what sort of happens after that? And then I've also got some very interesting work on this area.
Yeah, so I'd like to take this one just because it's actually a question that I've been asked many times over the years in general, even outside of Comingle. But I'll start by saying that first of all, one of the things I like about Comingle is that it still stacks right on top of an existing basic income. So basically, any basic income is that is implemented at a city, state, national level. Um, it will decrease inequality a certain degree and it will provide some amount of basic income. And Comingle then can operate on top of that to boost that UBI a bit more and reduce inequality a bit more. And so both of those things I think are valuable regardless. Yeah, I don't subscribe to a notion that there's like some maximum amount of basic income outside of the maximum that, let's say, the political possibility or economic kind of boundaries. But I think Commingle just in general is just a nice boost on top of anything. And second, in general, to say what's next outside of Commingle, even I would say that any basic income that is implemented, I think, will not be ideal right off the bat. Even if we look back at Social Security, and again look back at those Townsend groups, like the Townsend groups were talking about something that was really like a basic income for seniors, and it was a good amount of money, and it was not tied to your work history. Um, when FDR came in and with Social Security, he was looking at those and basically saying, all right, we have to do something. We can't go that far, so we're going to do Social Security. And Social Security did not look like it did now back when it was first launched. It ignored quite a few workers that were disproportionately black, by the way, um, like farm workers and stuff, and care workers, and like these professions did not count. So there will be an improvement that needs to continue happening over time, and I think that whatever the kind of North Star UBI proposal is, and of course different people will have their kind of different North Stars. Um, I think that it's going to be a process of taking a lot of time and continually improving this over decades. It's not going to be like something where it's launched and it's done, and hands clean. What's next? I think it will be just this step by step by step process. And again, when tying that back to Comingle, I think Comingle will help kind of show what that North Star should be, and help along the way. That's what I think.
I also want to add that but the way I see UBI in general expanding is, or at least a good version of UBI is some version less dependent on the amount of the income, but more on the universality and the true efficiency of the model of it happening somewhere, be it whatever country, be it based on a carbon tax or whatever, just some amount that justifies setting up a framework where everyone gets the payout and it's funded somehow. And it's truly universal. I believe once that exists, it'll be politically impossible to get rid of, and just be an excuse once the impact starts to be shown for it to grow in that place, in that country, in that whatever, in that model. And as that happens, I see it sort of like grabbing hold in a very resilient way, because unlike other programs, you can't demonize everyone and get rid of the program. It'd be political suicide to get rid of it wherever you are. So I see it in that way, sort of expanding around the world as more people take note of it. At the same time, universal healthcare has shown itself, in my opinion, to be a much more efficient and robust mechanism for delivering healthcare to the public. And, the United States is decades behind on that sort of thing, and very stubborn about picking it up. So even if something becomes, this very resilient and virally spreading idea, like I see it as a next step in sort of human history of how we organize our societies and our social welfares, it could take a very long time and still be very hard fought to spread it around the world. And Comingle has a role to play, or an opportunity, even if there is, say, United States passes a very robust basic income and aren't as many people really that incentivized to join Comingle. The same model, it can be very instrumental in other places too.
Conrad,
I see so go ahead, Ryan.
I want to push on something you said, because I think it's really, really important. You said you can't demonize everyone. Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna put the bottom line up front and then go into some theory. But that statement of you can't demonize everyone is why universality is so important. It's why you have the capital U in universal basic income. That's the bottom line up front. Now I'm gonna go do a really quick survey of theory. Within the social sciences, there's some sort of very famous authors, Snyder and Ingram, 1993. They have a theory about the social construction of target populations. They take a cross of power and construction, whether the group is powerful or not, high or low power, and then construction, whether the group is positively or negatively construed. And what you'll find is that this universality breaks the social construction, and it allows visible benefits to flow to negatively constructed populations and low power populations. If you don't have that universality, powers that have their own vested self-interest will use it to steer benefits towards themselves if they're powerful, and to steer benefits away from low power or negatively constructed groups. And you see this relaxation of universality a bunch in the pilots. You see basic incomes or guaranteed incomes being targeted towards low power, positively socially constructed groups. You'll see people talking about baby bonds as alternatives to UBI, or child tax credits as alternatives to UBI, or rarely
the U out of it.
You're taking the U out of it. You are
guaranteed
taking
income, so
exactly.
They don't have to say universal anymore.
You are taking the U out of it, and by taking the U out of it, by taking the universal out of universal basic income, you're doing a half measure. Ultimately, anything that takes the U out of universal is a half measure, and you are sort of contributing to the Swiss cheese of a social safety net that we have in this country.
But that said, I think
it's super important to like, you can't demonize everyone, and the role of that universality plays in the universal basic income. Over.
Yeah, I kind of see how this, if it does play out to become a national thing, it's not going to go straight to being a national policy. Like I see it working kind of like the pot laws, or where it's like one state will start to recognize, oh, maybe let's give this a shot. And it will become sort of seen as beneficial to that state, and then everybody else will catch on because a couple states were willing to take the risk. I don't know.
I also see it's just wholly unpredictable. The game of like which country is going to do it first, and what's going to really.
I don't think it's country. I think it's state.
Or
because right now we're doing like which city is it working in, and then you're going to have the counties for a guaranteed income, and you're going to have the states for a guaranteed. That's how I see it playing out, at least.
States are always funding limited though, so I could also see it being federal but smaller. Like
Yeah,
just
but states are
$100 a
different.
month.
Like it's actually you're more likely to fund your own state. Like California has a much different like amount of
Mhm.
wealth than Alabama does or something. So you're probably going to see like the states that have the self-sustaining wealth being the ones to try it out first. I don't know.
We could start a pool in
We could, yeah.
like
Let's
a
see
betting in
who's,
the
who's going to
UBI
get it
movement of
first.
how
Yeah.
is it going to happen first. And
But I mean, I'd like to for Comingle to help start at a city level and to actually have a universal, an entire city that is, at least capable of volunteering to participate, which is, what's the definition of universal at that point.
I do like I do really appreciate, even though it's incredibly painful, the year or so of funding hiatus that we took before our crowdfund, where we were half developed and forced to really think creatively about, okay, how do we really appeal to more markets to help get this built? Beyond the North Star version, which is the national model, everyone joins, simple, like other functionalities and features that we're conceiving and building into the design now, that will allow for that exact sort of a thing where, the impact data and what we can learn from the national model is enormous, but also having built into like our last phase of beta, the ability to test these local pilots where if there is a town somewhere or a state somewhere that has enough money to run a sort of thing, but wants to run it more permanent, more sustainable, we can be the tool for them to do that and have an entirely different model of UBI being tested to measure against the national model, against other social welfare models. You know, um, the amount of opportunity there is really exciting to me.
I think it'd be really fun to look at some kind of small town, in general that needs to happen anyways for like some kind of real saturation pilot. But like the opportunity for Comingle is, I think, huge there as far as some town, let's say a town of 5,000 people, and maybe it happens organically where a bunch of the people decide to all sign up to Comingle together, and then eventually it's like half the town is signed up and they're talking about each other about like how great this is. So then they're all encouraging more people to sign up, and then you got like most of the town together on Comingle, and then like the mayor decides to lean into it and like, hey, let's actually use some of our tax dollars to channel through the commingle mechanism to get to people. That's like kind of the ultimate public-private partnership where, thanks to like commingle creating the pipes, that public funding can actually go through that in a way that saves taxpayer dollars, both from on the bureaucratic end, but also saves taxpayer dollars based on the difference that reduced poverty and increased security has on these costs that tax dollars go into.
And the opportunity of a saturation pilot, especially a long-term or unending one, to finally measure macroeconomic effects that we've all been forced to speculate about this whole time, of like, do more people start businesses knowing that the general population has more money to spend there, rather than these randomized pilots where it can't affect things at that level. The ability to scale even among like a town of 5,000, like you said. I think about the Give Directly pilots, where they're the only ones that I know of that had really significant, like whole villages were specifically, done with a saturation model. And what they found is not only did the macroeconomy of that village experience sort of a rising tide, so did the next village over that wasn't getting the basic income just from the extra opportunities that were happening in their distinct vicinity. And the ability to measure this kind of stuff, I think, is very valuable information that we haven't had before.
Yeah. Michael, did you want to say a bit more even, and maybe tell listeners about what you're up to too?
Yeah, for sure. So what I'm working on with a nonprofit that I started, we've got a little team going on here in Phoenix, mostly volunteer for now. It's called the Logical Foundation, and we are sort of taking a different, but I think it could work very closely with Comingle, with some other organizations like Give Directly. We're basically trying to enable any funder to build a program that is to their specifications to fight poverty where they want to, where they live, and sort of maximize their impact. Basically, it comprises of two parts. One is a program builder, and alongside that, like a fundraising platform, fundraising mechanism to pay fundraisers and to scale up. And that basically says, if you're a philanthropist and you live in some place, then so like maybe Boise, Idaho, you'd be able to you'd be able to customize a program for a specific population. And I know that this all is not universal, but the goal is that you'd end up with a bunch of different programs that can be made permanent through philanthropy, as in basically you get one program and you hire somebody in some location and they continue fundraising as like through the nonprofit model, and fund a program that efficiently distributes the vast majority of the money spent into people's hands while increasing the visibility of basic income in general by a lot. So the idea is sort of what happens when, or what is needed in order to get a lot of the powerful politicians, powerful interest groups, and the funders that fund them. How do you get those people on board in order to accelerate universal basic income happening? We think that basically in order to do that, you need a lot of connections and a lot of relationships with somebody who is working full-time for basic income. And that's currently not really possible because all of these different pilot programs and organizations only operate in one location. So they might be like in Florida or in Sacramento or something. We want to instead build basically a large nonprofit that philanthropists and especially foundations, like large institutional funders that are not allowed by their founding documents, they're not allowed to fund things that are maybe more innovative, like Comingle. They have to spend their money on certain programs, and oftentimes they have to spend their money on specific populations. So the mission of the organization is to unleash the massive anti-poverty potential of basic income. Yeah, I'm sure I could have probably explained that a whole lot better. I'm building a TED Talk and stuff, but but
yeah,
there's your like
a
5
key
minute off the
component.
top.
You're working on a key component that we're struggling with too. Is like a lot of this depends on how much of the locked up wealth in the community can be unlocked, and how do you do that?
Yeah.
So we should talk some more.
Yeah, we should. One thing I'm definitely thinking about is one collaboration opportunity with Comingle. I think would be we're going to have application processes like most other pilots. we'll be trying to avoid one-time programs, though. Try to do as many permanent ones. But for every application thing that we put out there, we're probably going to get way more people than we can actually fund, and then we can try to funnel them towards Comingle. So I think that's a good opportunity. I also want to work with like Give Directly as well.
Yeah, that's something I've talked to there's other people who run pilots and help philanthropic dollars get to the places that they're required to spend them to and things like that. I've talked to like Aid Kit, they deal with the same thing where they have a model where they charge for services to, keep their business afloat, to as efficiently as possible deliver a pile of philanthropic dollars to an intended target group, and along the parameters as close to UBI as they can of the client. And there's pilots that are too small, they can't really take on, it's not worth their time. Pilots that the parameters they don't fit, they can't really take on. And then the biggest issue is, like I said, they get 10,000 applicants for 100 slots, and there's 9,900 people that don't get in, that are interested, that they're really expressed an excitement to send them to Comingle, as well as the people who are part of the pilots they do run that end. Where do you go when they end, or how do you further subsidize it? Like Comingle could still stack on top. So we've been pressured early on to like try and compete with the Aid Kits and Give Directlies of the world, but that is, in the way I see it, a much smaller niche. The way it's designed, because it's targeted welfare through direct cash, essentially, it's necessarily going to be limited to a very small percentage of the population for the sake of demonstrations and research. And the niche we're trying to fill is everybody else. So I don't feel like there is a competition. There's a lot of room for collaboration, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. One other kind of interesting thing that came to my mind that's very relevant. I got an email yesterday from I think Fund for Guaranteed Income, where they're announcing this new program where they're dispersing 12 participants, $12,000, so $1,000 for a year. But on the email, they said that this program was mostly enabled by a $1 million donation from these wealthy people in that area. And I kind of did the math, and I'm like, wait a second. I'm like, wait a second. You're dispersing. You're putting $144,000 into people's hands, and the grant amount was $1 million. Where is the money going?
Yeah, it's absurd. Because, we could build Comingle and deliver all that money for less than that. It's sort of absurd.
So I'm trying. So one thing that we want to do is basically put 80 cents out of every dollar that we can get into people's hands directly. One interesting thing about that is the tax write-offs for donations. If you're wealthy, it's the largest, the top tier of the income tax is 37%. So if you're getting a 37 cents back for every dollar that you donate to something, but then 80 cents of that is getting directly into people's hands in your community, you're actually putting more money overall into your community than there was before.
Yeah, it's sort of government subsidized through the tax break.
Right? Basically. Yeah, basically.
I mean, it's similar with us. It's like people say, it's similar.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
But,
thanks, Michael, for contributing and telling everyone about your own project too.
Yeah, for sure. I'll definitely come back on and we'll do a whole thing when our software is ready, because we need to basically be able to customize and in an automated way launch programs and develop them and distribute funds. It's a lot of stuff, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And I want to bring up the next speaker. We're in the final 10 minutes here. Matu Clouds, and thank you for joining us again. And I'm just curious, like, do we call you Matu? Is that your name, or just a like nickname for Twitter handle? Matu, you there?
No.
Oh, we lost another one.
I believe he does go by Matu. At least that's what I've called him. But
I'd like to correct you.
Let's see. He might be. Oh, there he is. You on there?
See if this works this time. Maybe.
Okay.
No, maybe lose him again. That's frustrating.
But he has just launched a new website for the project that he's working on, and it is at. Oh, there it is.
We can hear you now, Matu.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to give a shout out to the new website for utufund.org. Maybe I'll post that in here. Unless do you want to put that in the comments so people can find it?
Yeah, and thank you for that. Sorry, I've been having very bad internet. I kept going on and off, but I hope now it's okay. In case I'm not audible, just send me an emoji. I'll know. I'm not.
You sound good.
We hear you. Sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, it's Matu. Matu, that is my name, and clouds is the same meaning in my native language. You've just answered the you've answered the question I had in mind, because for me, I have seen most of these pilots. They have been mostly being done to control groups. That is mostly communities in rural areas, and I was wondering how, like in an urban setting where people from diverse background, diverse areas, how like a UBI works, like let's say in a city. In a rural environment, people know each other. They are small communities. It's easier to get them organized, easier to get the people talking about the various concepts. But in urban settings, mostly you'll have means like the internet, and that's where people will probably get their communication, or they can organize in like groups like these ones we have. But you talked something about Comingle now being like centraling on the entire state. So I don't think such events would really matter as much as per se like one of smaller one where we are talking to about a control group, though that one would also give out much better, let's say, in terms of you're looking at the effects, or you're trying to study the specific group. Yeah. So that was my question as per se, but it's good to know that yours is more of a bigger. You're looking more in terms of bigger groups, which now you can get the data differently as the smaller pilots. I hope it's coming a bit clear. And also another point.
I think. Okay.
Just the last point I wanted to emphasize was what you were talking about, table banking. Around here, they are called chamas, and they are very popular, where people get together, they contribute money, and then they share it amongst themselves. Yeah.
Now, did you have any contact with the 12-year study that was going on in Kenya?
It's being done in the western areas. Me, I'm in the central area, but I have, yeah.
I'm sure they'd be curious. Whoever's organizing that would be curious to see what you're up to also.
Have you seen any news there in Kenya of these initial results that just came out this week?
Yeah, and most of them I can actually testify they're actually real problems on the ground that are being sorted. Like the one they mentioned about alcoholism and domestic abuse. These are very rampant in let's say villages. And after they were given a basic income, you will find that such incidences they reduce. And the reason being is the young men they'll find purpose. It will empower them to go look out for employment and not be so idle as per se. So these are results which I can say they are solving real problems on the ground.
Isn't it also part of the design of the Kenya pilots, or correct me if I'm wrong, but don't they make sure to give money to people as individuals, either as individuals or to the woman of the household, which I think is a major failing of a lot of these pilots in the U.S. is they just give it to the household, like whoever controls the finances, I guess, and that allows for the continuation of financial abuse, whereas the women in these households have their own access to their own money and their own power from it. There's a statistic in the U.S. That's shocking. Like 99% of domestic violence also is coupled with financial abuse, and it just tells me that a woman who doesn't have to stay doesn't when the violence is happening. So I do you have any insight onto whether or not that was a big part of the drop in domestic violence as well, or what?
Around here, people normally work in the traditional settings where, like, the man is the one who controls the budget for the house. But again, we are talking about basics. These are things like food. These are things that involve clothing, children. So empowering the woman also makes a lot of sense because she's the one who's mostly left to deal with such matters. So when a woman is empowered also, and it means that the whole household is empowered. So the man does not have the what can I say? The house is running well, so they won't have disagreement or quarrels regarding the funds because the house is being well run. So I think they were giving for both the man and both the husband. So
Yeah,
creating
and
some
the
sort of
kids
equality.
too.
Yeah, creating an equality.
Yeah, it just put some numbers behind this too for listeners who are curious. In Kenya, they found a reduction of over 50% of abuse, partner abuse, defined even as like instances of being like dragged and kicked, like this real physical abuse was cut in half. And it was also seen too, like people will say, oh, that happened there and it's not going to have the same impact, like in the US or Canada or something. But in the Manitoba, in the dolphin saturation pilot in the 70s in Canada, this was a 37% reduction in domestic abuse there as well. So yeah, you just see this big impact, and that's one of the important that as Conrad said, this is one of the important characteristics of basic income, that this goes to each individual, not just the household as a whole. It really does have different impacts when each and every member of the household has their own basic income floor and has that power through that um, instead of the traditional way that welfare tends to be distributed. That kind of feeds into this um, lack of independence of members of the household.
Thanks, Matthew. Did you have anything else you wanted to? I guess we're wrapping up here. Was there anything else you wanted to bring up while you're on?
Yeah, just say thank you for mentioning that I launched my website, and I'm going to post it here so that in case somebody wants to sign up for my newsletter, they can sign up. Thanks for that.
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's interesting.
Thanks, Matu. And yeah, we're towards the end here. Ryan, thank you for joining us today. And would you like to have some final thoughts to share?
Sure. I mean, my final thought is I think Comingle's the bee's knees. The progress that you've made over the past years has been incredible, and I look forward to Comingle launching by the end of 24.
Yeah,
Amen.
we're happy to have you as a part of it.
And speaking of which, I put that post in the comments for all the different ways to follow along or get involved. There's the crowdfund. There's us on Twitter. There's the Comingle YouTube channel is fun. Josh just put a new video on there about mushrooms and the forest economy and how that relates to UBI. So yeah, find a way to follow along, get involved, just be part of the community as we build it. And it's good to have you.
Yeah, and just a reminder too for listeners that recordings of our spaces become available on the Comingle YouTube channel. So you're always free to check out previous spaces and previous guests there. So yeah, thank you all for being here today, listen into this discussion and take part in it. And again, we do this every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. And hopefully we'll see you next week. And yeah, thank you all for being here.
All right. Thanks a lot.